I am going to say something about what I did as a fellow, where I came from, where I want to go now. Um, I essentially, I wrote the project for the Urban Studies Foundation, and this project was about 3 different case studies. And it was about a comparative study of urban marginality in London, Rome, and Bucharest. And I didn't do it. I just, I started with Bucharest, and I stayed there. I'm almost still there. So this is Bucharest. And all the pictures, more or less all the pictures are taken from the field because I also used, as Cecilia did, a kind of visual approach. I'm an urban ethnographer. So I did a visual anthropology, if you want. So the first point I want to touch really is about this idea of moving, okay? Because I have been moving quite a lot in the last few years, and the reason why I want to talk a little bit about this is maybe to have a conversation with the second cohort of fellows. So I did my PhD at Durham, and then I did a postdoc in Australia, and then I became a fellow, and I went to live in Bucharest, and now I am a lecturer in geography at Cardiff. But actually, from September, I'm going to join the University of Sheffield. So as you can see, this is my kind of nomadic style, but I'm going to stay in Sheffield for a while, so don't worry, John. No, actually, I'm really looking forward to it. It's an excellent opportunity to do more research, and I'm going to say something about this in a second. Now, what I am doing in all this moving is actually almost always the same thing. So the idea is to rethink marginality, urban marginality, but more concretely to rethink life at the margins. So for me, what I'm really interested into is the experience of people living at the margins, okay? And the margins, of course, is a very broad concept and idea. In order to rethink life at the margin, I think I need to rethink the city. No, I need to buy into a differential approach, if you want, to urban studies. And I'm particularly into this idea of the city as an assemblage of human and non-human components, if you want. And of course, this assemblage, looking into this assemblage, leads also to rethinking the subject of the margin. So rethinking the experience of marginality itself. And this is very much connected, of course, with politics and eventually also policy. So this is the kind of journey, if you want, intellectual journey that I started with my PhD, and that is very much going on still now. Now, what I did essentially in Bucharest are 2 ethnographies. So it's true that I actually been only to one place, but I did at least 2 things. The first one, the main project, was about a research around street-level drug users and service providers. So it's a little bit of harm reduction, as we heard before, and it's also about the experience of using drugs. And I looked at 2 different places, the underground canals in the main train station of Bucharest, so people living underground and consuming drugs within these canals, and also a specific neighborhood of the city, which is in the southern part of Bucharest. It's called Ferentari. And then I became involved in another project, first as an activist and second also as an ethnographer, and this was related to evictions in the city center of Bucharest. So in a sense, becoming homeless. And I have to say that my PhD was about homelessness, so that's why I got into that as well. And this project actually became almost more important than the first one in terms of outputs, and I will say about this in a second. From the theoretical point of view, during the fellowship and also nowadays, I'm really into this idea, as I said, of rethinking life at the margins. And I'm really into also this journey that is bringing me to touch upon some of the concerns that Cecilia's referred to before. So this idea of using creative methodologies in order to open up different ways of talking about my own work, my own academic work, in order to talk to different audiences, if you want. And I did a film myself, a documentary myself. I'm going to say it about this in a second. Now, what about publications? Because, of course, this is what we do as academics within our own world, let's say. So I have, a few papers that came out during the fellowship. So a few things like in social and cultural geography, environmental and planning A with Colin McFarlane, transactions, APD. And these works are a mix of previous case studies that I have elaborated during the fellowship, so previous kind of fieldworks mainly related with my PhD, and also some original work that is arising from the fellowship. I spent quite a long time preparing this edited volume, which is called Rethinking Life at the Margins, and this is precisely an output that is related to the fellowship. So I started doing this at the very beginning of the fellowship, and it took almost 2 years to do this project. It's a project that is made, of course, not only by me. We have 13 scholars in the book, and it's very much related to the ideas I was telling you before, this interrelation between an assemblage urbanism and a post-human approach to the subject, if you want, and it's published by Routray. And I'm also trying at the moment to publish more in policy-oriented kind of journals as well. So recently I was invited to the 10th year anniversary edition of the European Journal of Homelessness, which is a journal that speaks mainly to policymakers and practitioners. And actually next week I'm going to Dublin to talk with the people that actually wrote this, collaborated to this special issue in order to reflect upon the status of homelessness research in Europe. So this work, if you want, is not related to the more speculative and or even ethnographic work that I have been doing, but it's very much policy-oriented, it's very much located within a specific debate of homelessness policy. Now, I want to give you 2 concrete examples about publications that came out of the fellowship. And the first one is related to a paper that came out last year in Transactions. And this paper is actually based on the fieldwork that I did in Turin, in Italy, as part of my PhD. And one thing that I loved about the fellowship is that I was able actually to continue to work on data that was collected a few years ago. So there is, if you want, a revision of that data. I had enough space and the freedom to do that, and that actually was the best part of my experience with the Urban Studies Foundation. So this is a paper in which I'm essentially reflecting upon the encounter between Italian homeless men and homeless men that are coming from other places, especially Africa. So this encounter in certain spaces, which are usually normative spaces of care sometimes, this encounter is usually very dense and very tense, and it's based on a racial tone. While the same people encountering in other spaces in the city, they don't interact on a racial basis, they actually cooperate. So here the idea is to look at the atmosphere of place and how the atmosphere of place can induce and can produce racialized encounters. And I think this is quite relevant, especially nowadays in our cities, of course, because of the refugee crisis, which is not a crisis at all, of course, but it's about this. Another paper that just came out is called Revitalizing the Uncanny. I love to play with these very fancy titles. So here the idea is this paper actually comes out of the fieldwork I did in Bucharest. It's about the project that I did with the evicted people. So we are talking about a community of 100 Roma people that were evicted from their home in the city center of Bucharest. Now, the interesting fact is that these people decided to protest against the eviction, and this is quite unique because usually the Roma subject is not political in Romania. It doesn't have a political subjectivity. It doesn't resist when he's harassed or pushed at the margin. In that case, they did so. And they essentially dwelt on the street for two consecutive years. And I was involved in their resistance as an activist, as I said, but also as a researcher. Now, the paper is claiming that that resistance was possible because in the moment in which these people occupied the pavement, they became something different. They became an uncanny political subject, something strange that the state didn't know how to respond to. Uncanniness, it's if you want, it's the feeling of being afraid about something that you don't really know, you don't really understand. So that uncanniness opened up the space of resistance that was very important for these people and also very important for for other people that were inspired by this resistance. Of course, that uncanniness didn't last for the whole 2 years, because another affection, if you want, entered into the game, and the affection is that of becoming homeless. So the fact that you lived on the street, on the pavement for 2 consecutive years makes you make your own subjectivity slower in a sense. It's heavier. Everyday life becomes really heavy. So there is a sort of inertia. I'm talking about this project as well. And this is exactly the political argument. Uncanniness should be sustained, tackling also this kind of inertial movements of life on the street. And of course here there is very much, the study is very much about the interrelation of one's own body and the materiality of the street, the production of subjectivity through that relation. So these are 2 publications, just to give you a flavor of what I have been publishing in this period. Now, what I'm working on at the moment, essentially, I have the idea of, in the next 5 years, of doing 2 monographs. One is very much related with the work I did with the Urban Studies Foundation. I already started to write this monograph, but I realized at the beginning I wanted to do a monograph just about the case of the eviction. And then I suddenly realized, thanks to a conversation with Ashamin, my mentor, and also he was also my PhD supervisor, that actually if I looked at my different fieldworks from a different point of view, I could have combined them into a more powerful kind of statement, if you want. So the idea here is to look at the fieldwork I did with service providers for drug users, at the experience of drug consumption itself, and also the experience of living rough on the street to resist against eviction, to look at these 3 things as creating an infrastructure of care, everyday care at the margins. So the book is going to be about the everyday the everyday act of caring for others, and this act of caring for others at the margins is always mediated by particular materialities and particular agencies. And I think that looking within this assemblage of care, we can understand new forms of politics, or even old form of politics of resistance, that are not acknowledged by meta-narratives or meta-understanding of resistance and marginality. And the second project, which I really want to do work on in the next few years at Sheffield, is essentially a book about homelessness. It's about this idea of looking at the lessness part of the word homelessness, which is about the project of becoming homeless subjects. So lessness, in a sense, as a platform, okay? A platform that is not only made by, of course, by discourse or by the lack of shelter, but it's an assemblage by many different components that actually create an institutional subject, the subject of homelessness. And I think that focusing on that kind of assemblage, on the production of that kind of assemblage, we can understand what homelessness really is, and maybe we can imagine a different politics around it. Now, future exploration, I will just glimpse over this. There is the idea to step up a little. In Sheffield, I will take up this position as senior research fellow, and I'm very lucky because in the first 3 years I will mainly concentrate on research, and I will be able to expand my research agenda. At least this is what they told me. So the idea here is to work towards an application for a substantial research grant, and I would really like to look at the everyday experience of activists and activism at the urban margins in Eastern Europe. And when I say Eastern Europe, I'm comprising Ukraine as well. So it's the idea of looking at this side of Europe, which of course is researched, but I think is not enough research from an ethnographic point of view, and especially when it comes to this kind of practices of everyday resistance against harassment, against marginalization, against evictions, for instance. So this is the kind of project I would like to do, and this time really comparative and really, but again, really ingrained in the everyday experience of people in different cities in Eastern Europe. Now, I want to spend like a couple of minutes talking about this idea of engaging and activating, if you want. This is very important to me. So if you ask me, I don't see myself as a scholar. Very pretentiously, I see myself as an intellectual. And for me, intellectual, especially in my own cultural tradition, which is Italian, of course, you can hear it from my beautiful English accent, is of constantly engaging with the people we do research with, and also of constantly engaging of constantly trying to produce a political alternative to the dominant narratives. We do that as academics, okay, when we produce our own work. But sometimes our own work is written in a way that is not accessible to people. We talk in a way that is not really for the masses, let's say, okay? So the idea here is for me to actually spend at least 50% of my time to produce collaborative piece of work and to try to engage more with communities. And I did that in Romania, okay? I did that working with an NGO. I did that constructing a blog with one of the evicted women of the community, and the blog is about her own experience, written, of course, in Romanian, translated into English, with pictures and photos taken by me, helping to provide harm reduction services. For instance, here in Italy, during the fellowship, I was enrolled into a program that was trying to implement a specific policy that is called Housing First, the policy for homeless people, and I was working with practitioners, kind of providing, if you want, a framework to understand that policy, which is a US policy, to try to translate that into the Italian context. And that was not an academic project, it was really about everyday engagement. Now, the thing that I did, and the reason why I didn't do my book during the fellowship, is because I decided to do a documentary, and I will invite you to take just one of these, if you can pass. It's just a little summary, because I don't have time to enter into details. So the documentary is a piece of collaborative work with the community of evicted people. In Vulturilor, it's called A Început Ploaia, which means it started raining. The documentary has essentially, the idea is a 72 minutes feature documentary. It's the first documentary about evictions in Romania, in Bucharest. And the idea is to use this piece of work in 3 different ways. The first one is to use it in academic events. So if you are coming to the RGS, for instance, this year, or the RC21, the documentary is going to be screened and featured in academic venues, because this is a piece of ethnographic work through visual methods. So there is an academic component there. There is the idea of using the documentary to set up informal meetings with activists across Eastern Europe, and I'm working with activists in Romania to do this, and actually we are going to Budapest at the beginning of June to meet activists there. So to use the documentary as a way of establishing relationship and negotiation, and also to, of course, participate to film festival, which is a totally different game. And actually, 2 days ago, I was notified that the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival accepted the documentary. So for the 2 Australian friends, maybe you can go and watch it there. I just want to conclude showing you the trailer. It's very brief, it's just 1 minute, but it gives you an idea of what this project is about. If I can find it. Oh, here.
Aici o să rămânem, ori murim, ori trăim. Cât o să rezistăm, atâta rezistăm, pentru că nu avem unde să ne ducem.
Noi am decis că stăm în stradă, noi decidem dacă stăm în stradă. Am căutat lemne și ne-am ajutat reciproc. Fiecare ne-am ajutat unul pe celălalt, ca să spun așa.
Totdeauna între WC-uri, da. Și portuși.
Bucureștiul generează probabil în jur de 800-1000 de persoane evacuate pe an.
Unde sunt toți cei care ar trebui să ne apere? Să ne ofere a copiilor noștri un adăpost? V-ați bătut joc de noi! Bună seara, domnule Goi!
Bună seara, bună seara! Ce faceți dumneavoastră?
Oare ce-ar fi dacă într-o zi te-ai trezi fără să fii cum știi?
And this was, as I said, a collaborative project. Part of the editing was done with people from the community, and they are still involved in representation of this work in different venues across Europe. So yeah, this is me. This is what I did. Yeah.